Controversy surrounds Mayor Tiffany Henyard amid allegations and political maneuvers. Recent developments in the village of Dalton have ignited significant controversy, with increasing public scrutiny directed at Mayor Tiffany Henyard and her leadership tactics. At a recent village board meeting, Henyard announced a series of 30-day temporary appointments for several crucial roles, including the police chief, village attorney, special counsel, and executive assistant. While Henyard framed the move as a procedural necessity, many residents and critics perceived it as a calculated effort to regain sympathy and control amid mounting criticism of her administration. Political commentator Candace Owens emerged as one of Henyard's most vocal critics, accusing the mayor of unethical behavior and leveraging intimidation to stifle dissent. Owens claimed that Henyard pressured residents to either back her or remain silent, allegedly threatening to withhold municipal services from those who oppose her leadership. According to Owens, such actions reflected a disturbing abuse of power, rendering Henyard unfit to lead a community. The accusations come as Henyard's administration is already embroiled in multiple scandals and lawsuits, further eroding public confidence. Owens pointed to a pattern of coercive behavior and intimidation, arguing that such conduct had shattered the community's trust in its local government. She called for a thorough investigation into the allegations, warning that if proven true, the consequences could be severe, not just for Henyard, but for the broader perception of leadership in Dalton. Her remarks appear to resonate with many Dalton residents, who had grown increasingly frustrated with what they viewed as a culture of secrecy and control. Some citizens, emboldened by Owens' statements, began openly calling for Henyard's resignation, citing a need for transparency, accountability, and ethical governance. The latest allegations only amplified calls for change, as more community members voiced concern over the mayor's leadership style. Despite the backlash, Henyard supporters have rallied behind her, defending her decisions and denouncing Owens' criticism as politically motivated and lacking concrete proof. They argue that Henyard had been unfairly targeted and painted as a scapegoat by those resistant to her leadership style and reforms. Still, public sentiment appeared to be shifting, with growing unease over the mayor's approach to governance and increasing doubts about her commitment to serving Dalton's best interests amid the political turmoil. Henyard made headlines again with a surprising public message congratulating former President Donald Trump on his 2024 election victory. In her statement, she praised Trump's historic comeback and called for national unity, urging Americans to set aside political differences and work together. The message, posted just an hour after Trump's win was declared, caught many off guard given Henyard's past rhetoric and political affiliations. The enthusiastic praise for Trump marked a stark shift in tone. Critics quickly speculated whether the message was a sincere gesture or a strategic attempt to realign herself politically as her administration faced intensifying scrutiny. The timing, tone, and content of her post led many to believe it was more about salvaging her own fragile political standing than about celebrating democratic process or unity. Observers noted that political leaders typically offer formal, neutral congratulations in the wake of a presidential election. Henyard's effusive and personal endorsement stood out, raising questions about whether the mayor was attempting to curry favor with Trump supporters or appeal to a broader conservative base amid her embattled status. Her sudden embrace of a controversial national figure seemed to reflect a calculated pivot rather than a genuine political realignment. The irony of Henyard's move was not lost on her critics. They highlighted the disconnect between her public call for unity and the accusations of divisive, coercive leadership that had plagued her administration. Many pointed out that the same mayor being accused of silencing critics, suppressing dissent, and leveraging power for personal survival was now appealing for cooperation and harmony, a message that rang hollow to those familiar with her leadership track record. These concerns have only deepened the public's distrust. Residents increasingly feel that Henyard is more focused on preserving her position than addressing the urgent needs of the community. The legal issues facing her office and the public outcry over alleged abuses of power have made it difficult for many to see her recent actions as anything other than political maneuvering. Supporters of Henyard maintained that her message to Trump was heartfelt and intended to inspire a fresh start despite the challenges she faces. They argue that she is trying to shift the conversation and lead Dalton into a more unified future. However, skepticism remains widespread. Many question whether Henyard's new message of unity reflects a genuine change in leadership philosophy or is merely a tactic to deflect from growing criticism and legal troubles. Dalton's political environment continues to grow more volatile. Henyard's leadership is under a microscope, with residents demanding answers and accountability. Calls for her resignation have grown louder as scandals and ethical concerns dominate headlines. Her overt alignment with Trump at a time of peak political tension and personal vulnerability is being interpreted by many as a desperate effort to reposition herself and survive politically. Whether Henyard's praise for Trump will bolster her standing or further alienate her from the community remains to be seen. But what is clear is that her administration stands at a critical crossroads. The allegations of blackmail, coercion, and misuse of authority have not only cast a long shadow over her leadership, but also sparked a larger conversation about ethics and power in local government as pressure mounts from residents, legal bodies, and national voices like Candace Owens. The future of Henyard's role in Dalton remains uncertain. Her recent moves, whether interpreted as strategic or sincere, underscore the fragile state of her political capital. Critics argue that aligning with a polarizing figure like Trump is unlikely to repair the fractures in the community unless paired with meaningful action to restore public trust. In the end, Dalton finds itself at a pivotal moment. The community is grappling with the tension between loyalty and accountability, and between political survival and genuine leadership. Mayor Henyard's ability to lead and her willingness to face the consequences of her actions will determine not just her legacy, but the future path of Dalton itself. Mayor Tiffany Henyard's leadership faces mounting pressure amid scandals and political shifts. Mayor Tiffany Henyard's future in Dalton remains uncertain as public distrust in her leadership deepens. With tensions escalating, her recent actions, particularly those aimed at shielding herself from ongoing legal scrutiny, have raised significant concerns. Multiple lawsuits and federal investigations continue to hang over her administration, and many see her sudden, enthusiastic support for former President Donald Trump following his 2024 re-election as a calculated move rather than a genuine political stance. The timing and tone of Henyard's congratulatory message to Trump were widely viewed as an attempt to align herself with a powerful national figure, possibly to deflect attention from her troubled record and bolster her political standing. However, critics argue that this alignment is opportunistic, especially considering Henyard's historically Democratic affiliations and the more progressive leanings of the Dalton community. Her sudden calls for unity have struck many as disingenuous, given her track record of divisive governance and her repeated exclusion of dissenting voices from meaningful participation in village affairs from many residents. These actions reflect not a leader seeking reconciliation, but a politician using strategic survival tactics to navigate a political storm. The growing dissatisfaction with Henyard's leadership, fueled by allegations of coercion, ethical misconduct, and corruption, has left her increasingly isolated. Her recent conduct has raised doubts about her capacity to foster cooperation, a skill she has repeatedly failed to demonstrate in her dealings with other officials and community members. At a recent village board meeting, these concerns came to a head. What should have been a routine session for discussion and problem-solving quickly unraveled into chaos. Henyard's attempt to control the proceedings took priority over addressing substantive issues, such as security and budgeting. Her leadership during the meeting reflected a troubling pattern of suppressing dissent and marginalizing opposing viewpoints. One of the most controversial moments came when Henyard deliberately excluded Trustee Kill from participating, a move that many saw as a power play intended to silence disagreement. Rather than facilitating an open forum for collaborative governance, Henyard doubled down on her authority, dismissing any efforts at dialogue. When Trustee Price did not acknowledge her self-assumed authority, Henyard responded with further displays of dominance, shifting the focus away from policy issues and toward personal control. The toxic atmosphere escalated to the point that Trustee Gonzalez walked out of the meeting, unable to endure what had become an increasingly hostile and unproductive environment. Instead of reflecting on the dysfunction and exploring more effective leadership methods, Henyard seized a moment to reinforce her self-image as the only one fighting for transparency and accountability. To many observers, it was a blatant attempt to spin the situation in her favor, while avoiding responsibility for the discord. This episode only intensified public skepticism and illustrated a larger pattern in Henyard's leadership style, one centered on self-preservation, manipulation, and control. As community trust continues to erode, her credibility is increasingly in question. The combination of political maneuvering, divisive tactics, and reluctance to engage in open governance has left her leadership hanging by a thread. Even as she speaks of unity and transparency, her actions have alienated both residents and fellow officials. Further complicating Henyard's situation is the controversy surrounding a forensic audit into Thorne Township's finances. Questions have emerged about potential credit card misuse among trustees, and Henyard's handling of the situation has done little to ease concerns. At the same village board meeting, her behavior hit a new low as she sought to redirect blame for the chaos. Rather than accepting responsibility for the meeting's breakdown, Henyard scapegoated the village's IT department and painted Trustee Gonzalez's exit as a dereliction of duty. These deflections were seen by many as a cynical effort to recast herself as a lone defender of the public interest. But instead of fostering trust or accountability, Henyard appeared focused on consolidating power and evading criticism. This perception was reinforced by her continued efforts to dominate meetings, limit dialogue, and control the narrative. All while essential community concerns remained unaddressed by the end of the meeting, it was clear that Henyard's leadership style had done more harm than good. The forum, intended to promote civic engagement and decision-making, became yet another stage for her to assert control. The fallout left both residents and trustees questioning whether her priorities lay with serving Dalton or simply clinging to her position as election season looms. The consequences of Henyard's actions will undoubtedly shape her political future. Her failure to cultivate cooperation, her reliance on power plays, and perception that she values authority over progress have all contributed to a growing wave of public disillusionment. With every contentious meeting and strategic pivot, Henyard's image as a collaborative leader becomes harder to sustain. Whether she can regain the community's trust remains uncertain. But what is clear is that many in Dalton are no longer willing to overlook the pattern of manipulation and divisiveness that has characterized her time in office. For Henyard, time may be running out, and the cost of political survival may ultimately outweigh any attempt at redemption. Mayor Tiffany Henyard's leadership in Dalton reaches a breaking point as tensions in Dalton escalate. Mayor Tiffany Henyard finds herself at the center of growing political controversy. Once seen by some as a promising local leader, Henyard's administration has become increasingly defined by allegations of corruption, coercion, and autocratic governance. In what many have called a strategic attempt to shift the narrative in her favor, Henyard publicly expressed her support for former President Donald Trump shortly after his 2024 re-election. But to many observers, this show of support felt less like a call for unity and more like a calculated move to align with a powerful political figure amid her own mounting legal and ethical challenges. Henyard's sudden embrace of Trump, despite her historically Democratic affiliations and the generally progressive leanings of her community, was widely seen as opportunistic. Critics argue that the social media posts served more to distract from her spiraling administration than to foster any genuine attempt at healing community divisions. Few believe a single public gesture will be enough to overcome the distrust that has been building over time, fueled by her lack of transparency, a refusal to collaborate with opposing voices, and an increasingly autocratic leadership style. The public's dissatisfaction with Henyard's governance, coupled with ongoing legal investigations and lawsuits, suggests that her political career may be approaching its end. The impact of her leadership, or lack thereof, will likely be felt long after her tenure, as voters reflect on the dysfunction and erosion of trust that has characterized her time in office. The most recent village board meeting served as a case study in how far Henyard's leadership has drifted from democratic ideals. What should have been an open forum for dialogue quickly devolved into chaos. Motions were ignored, civil discourse was dismissed, and Henyard dominated the proceedings with clear intent to maintain control at all costs. Her refusal to acknowledge alternative perspectives only deepened the divide in an already fractured community. At the center of the chaos was Henyard's escalating need to assert dominance. In a bold and controversial move, she excluded Trustee Kill from participation, a decision widely seen as punitive and silencing. Trustee Gonzalez ultimately left the meeting altogether, unable to endure the hostile and unproductive environment. Meanwhile, Trustee Carroll found herself stuck in the middle of a power struggle, attempting to fulfill her duties amid constant disruptions and political posturing, instead of working collaboratively to address Dalton's growing challenges, ranging from infrastructure issues to fiscal mismanagement. The meeting became a platform for Henyard to stage a dramatic monologue. Over nearly an hour, she positioned herself as a lone hero battling corruption within the system. She accused her critics of being self-serving and dishonest, all while painting herself as a misunderstood champion of the people. Her most prominent talking point was the $2 million in tax funds allocated for Thorne Township homeowners, a topic that might have merited genuine discussion had it not been used as a political prop in her self-promotional narrative rather than focusing on transparency or offering detailed explanations about how those funds would be handled. Henyard used the issue to cast herself as the only leader willing to protect the public's interest. She framed the entire opposition, anyone who questioned her authority or actions, as part of a larger hate group working against the people of Dalton. In doing so, she silenced dissent and reduced complex governance issues to personal attacks and binary battles of good versus evil. This strategy, however, appears to have backfired. Residents are increasingly weary of the spectacle. They aren't looking for political theater. They're seeking solutions to real problems. They want roads repaired, services restored, and transparency in how their tax dollars are spent. But instead of delivering on those expectations, Henyard has been more focused on political survival. Her meetings, once intended to foster dialogue and address policy matters, have devolved into combative sessions aimed at maintaining control rather than serving the public good. For Trustee Carroll, and others trying to navigate Henyard's chaotic leadership. The situation has become untenable. Instead of developing policy or tackling Dalton's urgent needs, they are trapped in a cycle of finger-pointing and blame-shifting. Time that should be spent on solving real problems is now consumed with defending against attacks and working around Henyard's increasingly erratic behavior as tensions rise. So does the toxicity within the board. The meeting, intended to be a civil space for progress, was hijacked by Henyard's personal agenda. The mayor's focus appeared to be not on Dalton's future, but on reinforcing her grip on power, regardless of the damage to institutional trust or community morale. Her disregard for open dialogue and collaboration has left both residents and trustees deeply disillusioned. Henyard's refusal to engage in productive discourse has effectively stalled the progress of governance in Dalton. The situation surrounding the $2 million tax fund only underscored these concerns. What began as a community-focused initiative quickly transformed into part of Henyard's re-election strategy. Framing herself as a sole champion of accountability, she dismissed any concerns or critiques as attacks against Dalton itself. Rather than bringing clarity, her rhetoric served only to further alienate those who had once supported her. As more residents began to speak out, a growing sense of disillusionment spread throughout the community. The question that began to circulate was simple. Can Henyard's leadership be salvaged, or is it too late? With each dramatic board meeting, that question becomes more pressing at its core. The dysfunction in Dalton is not just about one mayor. It's about the erosion of a political system that once prioritized community input, transparency, and respect for democratic processes. Henyard behavior, marked by an obsession with control, suppression of dissent, and manipulation of public perception, has left a lasting mark on the town's governance. Her strategy of painting critics as enemies and casting herself as a political martyr has failed to resonate with a population desperate for change. Residents don't want war rooms or monologues. They want infrastructure improvements, fiscal accountability, and leadership that listens. As her political capital dwindles, Henyard's increasingly theatrical tactics come off less as strength and more as desperation. Trustee Carroll's experience is emblematic of the broader struggles within the board. She's not just contending with policy issues. She's contending with a leadership environment that turns every decision into a battle. Under Henyard's direction, board meetings have become battlegrounds, not forums for dialogue. This toxic environment has undermined the board's ability to govern effectively, with long-term consequences for Dalton's ability to attract investment, retain civic trust, or deliver public services efficiently. The longer Henyard remains in power, the more polarized and fractured Dalton becomes. The mayor's disregard for process and her focus on self-preservation have left many feeling that change cannot come soon enough. What could have been an opportunity for transformation has instead become a cautionary tale of what happens when leadership becomes more about personal legacy than public service. As Dalton looks toward its next chapter, one thing is clear. The community is at a crossroads. Will it continue down a path of dysfunction under leadership defined by ego and manipulation, or will new voices emerge, focus on healing, rebuilding trust, and restoring functionality to a deeply wounded political system? Mayor Tiffany Henyard may still see herself as an embattled savior of Dalton, but the residents she was elected to serve are growing increasingly weary. Her credibility has eroded. Her leadership style alienates rather than unites, and the gap between her rhetoric and reality grows wider by the day. The damage done to Dalton's governance under her administration will not be easily repaired, but the first step may be a new chapter, led by those willing to listen, collaborate, and place the public above politics.